Your Honour, as indicated, the next witness is Mr. Monty Baker. I understand that that is...
Mr. Baker, can you hear and see me?
Yes, Your Honour.
It will be necessary for you to be sworn to give your evidence. Do you want to take an oath on the Bible or make an affirmation?
Yeah, I have a Bible here.
The Bible. Now, the law requires me to ask you to stand, if you would. Would you stand for me? And take the Bible and repeat after me. I do swear by Almighty God.
I do swear by Almighty God
That the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission
that the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and
nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Take a seat, please. Yes, Mr. Stewart.
As Your Honour pleases. Thank you. Mr. Baker, will you state your full names, please?
Montague John Baker.
Thank you. And do you have with you a copy of your statement to the Royal Commission dated 7 July 2015?
Yes.
And do you also have a copy of a selection of some of the documents, the correspondence that was given to you last week before you returned to Brisbane?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Now, reverting to your statement, is there any part of your statement that you would wish to amend or change?
Yes.
Can you identify that?
All right, there's one that you've already removed, 2A. I made a statement.
I'm not sure what
I said I could not recall. Yeah, I could not recall. Okay, and then the next one is...
Sorry, Mr. Baker, before you carry on, I didn't follow you on 2A. Are you referring to paragraph 2 small a on page 2?
Yes, yes. Yes.
I have a paragraph there. What is it that you want to amend about that?
The amendment's already been done by whoever sent me the new copy.
Well, not in the copy I have, Mr. Baker, which I understand is the one that you signed.
Okay.
Perhaps you could tell, there's no amendment in it, perhaps you could tell us what it should say.
Okay. The first sentence in 2A, response to allegation or complaints. While the removal should be where it says, while I am unaware, and then it goes right up to the first comma.
Well, perhaps that has been removed.
Yes,
do you have
it
one
seems to be already done.
All right, thank you. Is there another one, Mr. Baker?
Yes, and question 3 on the next page.
Yes.
Any training received in relation to child abuse? The first sentence. As I recall, yeah.
As I recall, no specific training was given in regards to child abuse. That sentence.
Yes.
And what changes that you want to make?
Well, I recall that there were publications given to the elders, such as Elders Shepherd the Flock of God. You must recall when I gave this statement, I had no notes, I had no records. I purposely tried to erase anything to do with my time in the church over the last 22 years. So trying to recall this information was impossible. But since I've been subpoenaed, I found that the counsel that I received has patiently and gently recalled a lot of my letters to mind, and as a result, the feelings I have now are different to when I first made the statement.
Yes, thank you. So, Mr. Baker, would it be right then to delete the words no specific and replace them with the word some? In other words, as I recall,
yes,
some training was given. Would that be accurate?
Yes.
Thank you. Are there any other amendments?
Yes, and the next question 4.
Yes.
Summary of the overall experience. I stated at the time I thought I was only involved in one request, and information has come to light that I was obviously involved in a number of requests for BCH's reinstatement.
Yes, well, the paragraph here says, starting in the third sentence, in the letter.
Sorry about that. Excuse me, Your Honour.
That's okay.
So,
I've made the same mistake myself.
Mr. Baker, in the last sentence, it says, well, I'm quite sure that I personally was only involved in one request by BCH for reinstatement. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
So you're saying you were personally involved in several requests, is that it?
Well, it's more than one.
All right.
At this time, when I was first contacted by the Commission and subpoenaed, I could not even remember BCH's name, let alone anything else.
So if we were to insert the words more than immediately
More
in
than
front
one,
of
yeah.
the word one, that would do it, would it?
More than one, yes.
All right. Any other amendments?
Yes. I mentioned in the next paragraph entitled capital NB, I mentioned I was unable to recall the names of others involved in the committee. Well, as a result of my seeing the letters, I can recall now.
So would it be right to then say I was unable rather than I am unable? I was unable to recall the names.
I was unable, yes.
And then to insert at the end of that sentence until I saw the correspondence.
Yes.
Yes. Are there any others?
5E.
Yes.
Any correspondence with the Watchtower? I stated I could not recall. Now I've seen the obvious letters.
Yes. Shall we just delete that paragraph, Mr.
Yes,
Baker?
yes.
Anything else?
6A, the second sentence. I do recall possibly seeing BCH at one meeting. In fact, he attended a number of meetings. The fact that tab 12 says I gave him commendation for his meeting attendance.
So is the position that you do recall seeing him sitting during a number of meetings?
Yes.
Yes. Any other changes, Mr. Baker?
No.
Do you otherwise confirm the statement to be true and correct?
Yes.
I tender the signature on it.
It'll become Exhibit 2917.
Now, Mr. Baker, when did you become a Jehovah's Witness?
Well, I've known it all my life, but I was baptised in 1969.
So were you essentially born into Jehovah's Witness faith through your family?
Yes. Yes.
Your parents witnesses?
My solo mother, yes.
And when did you become an elder, Mr. Baker?
1974.
You were an elder in the Beanley East congregation, is that right?
Yes.
And it's in that capacity that you dealt with BCH's requests for reinstatement?
Yes, I was the presiding overseer at the time.
Yes. And do you recall, what were the dates that you served as an elder in Beanley East?
It would have been late 89. I was sent by the circuit overseer across from Loganholme to Beanley East in order to assist some of the older brothers there.
And do you recall when you ceased being an elder at Beanley East?
Yes, mid to late 93.
And is that in fact when you left the Jehovah's Witness Church?
Yes.
And if I can ask you to just explain briefly what caused you to leave.
Well, I chose a lifestyle that was not compatible with their lifestyle. So as a result, I had to leave.
Were you disassociated, or, were you disfellowshipped, or did you disassociate?
Yes, I was disfellowshipped.
And after you were disfellowshipped, did the remaining members of the congregation cut themselves off from you?
Oh, yes, indeed. That was their requirement, and I fully expected that.
And is that what's referred to as shunning?
Yes, that's one way of putting it, yes.
Would you explain your experience of that having occurred to you?
Well, I fully expected it. It wasn't really a problem for me. It was more embarrassing for a lot of the witnesses that used to work for me. And they eventually, of course, all had to leave working for me. And I think it's more embarrassing for witnesses than it was for me, because I was fully expecting to go through that.
Is it a practice in your experience in the church? So I'm not talking about the current period, but in your experience in the church, is it a practice that was taught? In other words, it was part of the teaching of the church to its members that they should shun those who disassociate or are disfellowshipped.
Oh, indeed. The requirement is for them to actually not even say a greeting that's based on Scripture to such a person, not to have a meal with them. The only association I've had with them since is either in business matters where we have to attend these things, or situations like this. Otherwise, I keep well clear of them, and they keep well clear of me. I would be considered as an apostate to them. The scriptures clearly state that an apostate brings his neighbour to ruin, it says in Proverbs 11:9.
Is that
in other words,
is that a document you're referring to there, Mr. Baker?
that's just some mental notes I've made myself.
All right. Well, perhaps if you wouldn't mind putting them to one side.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you want to refer to be reminded of a scriptural reference or something, you're of course welcome to do so.
Well, that's what I was using it for.
All right. Thank you.
Mm.
Now, Mr. Baker, you were down here in Sydney for part of last week, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Here at the Royal Commission.
Yes.
And did you follow the proceedings?
Yes. Closely.
Did you hear each of the witnesses give their evidence?
Yes. There were portions of where the doctor was being interviewed. I missed some portions of that.
Yes. And have you studied the documents that have been tendered?
Yes. To the best of my ability.
And did you meet with BCG last week when you were in Sydney?
Yes, I did. I had the fortunate experience of actually meeting her in person.
Can you explain why you chose to meet with her?
Well, initially she didn't want to meet with me because she thought I was just another reporter or something. But as time went on, when she found out who I was, she gladly came up and spoke to me, and it was certainly an emotional occasion.
Did you feel it was a productive meeting?
Oh, indeed.
Now, obviously you have no way of knowing what's in the minds of other people, Mr. Baker, but from your understanding of Jehovah's Witnesses church and teaching, are you able to offer an explanation as to why other elders or former elders who are still part of the church, who've given evidence, have not watched the proceedings or read the statements or studied the documents? Would you have an answer to that?
Well, I'm quite surprised. I mean, I have nothing to lose in this hearing. Yet I've taken the time out to do it. I'm not trying to elevate myself, but I'm sure that the significance of this occasion would have motivated everyone that was giving evidence to be fully clear on every aspect. That's how I feel. I don't know what they felt. If they felt there's suits sitting behind you that would handle it all for them, I don't know.
But so there's no reason in the teaching of the church you can point to that would explain that to you?
Not really, no.
Well, I'm not asking you to speculate,
no.
So thank you.
No, I won't, no.
Mr. Baker, would you have a look at paragraph 2A of your statement?
Yes.
You say that if after investigations the allegations proved to be founded, the first response of the body of elders would be to the condition and welfare of the victim, making sure they were cared for during their traumatic ordeal. After that, a committee of 3 elders would be formed immediately to meet with the offender to render whatever discipline was needed according to scriptural laws. This would include disfellowshipping in the case of a violation against the law of the land. The various authorities would be notified. Now, in referring to notification of the authorities, do you mean to say that that would be as a matter of course, or that would be if required by the law?
Well, if it was required by the law, definitely. But also there's a scriptural reference here to chapter 13 to be in subjection to the superior authorities because they're placed there by God. And authority is needed today in order to maintain some form of order in society today. So if these laws are violated, then really the law of the land has to take its course, especially if it's a law of the land that is seriously violated.
Well, specifically referring back to your experience in the Beenley East congregation, are you saying that it was the case that as a matter of course, if there was a violation by a congregation member of the law of the land, it would be notified to the authorities? Or
Yes. Yes, for example, if it's a robbery, we wouldn't cover it over. We would encourage the individual first to go to the law of the land. We wouldn't want to be seen as harbouring a criminal.
Well, it's hard to imagine a robber voluntarily going and handing him or herself in, although I suppose it's possible. Did you have any experience of that actually happening?
Not really, not for a brother in the congregation.
And in respect of, was there any instance in which a brother or sister in the congregation was found by your elders to have broken the law of the land and that he or she was then turned into the authorities?
I believe in my early days there was one case, but I was not involved and I was not privy to that.
Do you know what the crime was in that case?
Yes, it was robbery. Whether he was a member of the congregation or not, I don't know, but he did attend.
Right, now dealing specifically with the case of BCG, would you go to what we refer to as tab 7? Do you have them numbered by their tab numbers, Mr. Baker?
Yes, I do.
And this is a letter apparently signed by you amongst others. Is that right?
Yes.
And I see that it's also apparently signed by someone reflected there as Rod Spinks, chairman. Is that the
Yes.
Rodney Spinks who's now at the service desk at the branch office?
Yes.
And this letter was the elders at Beenley East making inquiries with regard to the possible reinstatement of BCH. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, do you recall how this request came about?
Well, in actual fact, Rod Spinks was the chairman at the time, and he did have a phone conversation with Brother DeRoy in Mariba. The actual application for reinstatement must have, in fact, I think there is a letter stating that BCH did approach Rod Spinks at the recommendation of the Mariba brothers. Rod Spinks' name was given to him to contact in order to consider a plea for reinstatement.
And are we to understand that then the elders at Beenley East established a judicial committee to consider that request?
Oh yes, that's the committee shown there.
And do you recall what it is that BCH told you in relation to why he had been disfellowshipped at Mariba?
Yes, he told us it was for lying. He did not say that. He did not mention at all the pornea that was established in the second appeal. All he mentioned was the reason that he was disfellowshipped by the original body of elders, which I believe was lying and what was it?
Loose conduct.
Loose conduct. That's it. Yeah.
That's how it was put there. But you see in the middle of this page, it says, firstly, BCH says that the reasons for his disfellowshipping were lying and disregarding theocratic order, although the letter appears a little vague. Could you please clarify this for us? So that's your request, obviously, to Mariba to clarify, not so?
Yeah, disregarding theocratic order is an unusual one for me. I hadn't heard of a person being disfellowshipped for that.
And there's no mention in that letter of the, as you put it, pornea or the child sexual abuse. And is that because BCH didn't tell you about it?
They're right. Yes.
So are we to understand that at that stage the appeal committee findings had not been conveyed to you?
Well, if they had, I'm pretty sure they must have been conveyed to it, because the first meeting where this BCH came to my attention, it was mentioned of what he'd done, the pornea and the slander. So it must have been mentioned for it to come up in that meeting, yeah.
Well, where does it come up? With reference to what are you saying that it came up in that meeting, in what you call your first meeting?
Well, this is a matter where there's three brothers. The information was brought verbally to the meeting, the whole body of elders, before we established the committee, what BCH, who he was, he's making a plea for reinstatement. And then it was also brought out, as I mentioned in my statement, that he was disciplined for it, disfellowshipped, and I'm absolutely sure it was mentioned that he faced the authorities as well for it, and went to jail. But obviously this didn't happen at that time.
Yes. Perhaps if we look at tab 9, do you have that? That's
Yes.
a report on the reinstatement plea by BCH, and it's also signed by each of the elders at Beenley East.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have that document?
Yes.
And you see it sets out what what happened, first contacted us February 21, 1990 at Kingdom Hall, spoke to Rod Spinks, given contact in, and it's redacted, but it says Mariba congregation, as Brother Ron DeRoy, and that's his address has been redacted, of Mariba. Rod Spinks contacted DeRoy to determine nature of problem and informed case very complex and that BCH had recently applied elsewhere for reinstatement. And then the committee, being yourself and Mrs. Spinks and Johnson, met with BCH on the 6th of March 1990, and it outlines what his statement was. And if you just have a look through that, you'll see right down to the end of that paragraph where it says BCH reasons for disfellowshipping, lying and disregarding theocratic order. So is it not the case that that's where you got up to when you sent the previous letter we were looking at? You then sent a letter asking for clarification.
The focus that was brought to the attention of the meeting of the elders in Bentley was of his lying and loose conduct. Now, you will see later on in the letters that come up that BCH complains to the Watchtower Society about the Bentley elders requiring a point-by-point confession of what he had done wrong. You see, part of the reinstatement process, or the qualifications to be reinstated, is that a person acknowledges their wrongdoing. Now, if he was unable to, if we had to extract his real wrongdoing out of him, then we had to do it on a point-by-point basis. And that's why we got a letter back from the Watchtower Society saying there's no need for us to, rake over old coals, or go by point-by-point confession of the wrongdoing. But because of his obfuscation, we felt the need that he had to bring it out. And he was reluctant to bring it out all through his, from the letter that I've seen of the person who's the victim, he still wouldn't acknowledge what he had done.
Yes, Mr. Baker. Now, this particular document is dated 15 June 1990. Do you see that at the end?
Which one is that?
Tab 9.
Tab 9. Where's the date on that?
At the end, just above the signatures.
Oh, okay.
Do you see that?
Yes.
Yes, and so this is the record of your decision and the reasons for it not to agree to the request for reinstatement. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you recorded in the last paragraph, you say, at this point we have told BCH that we wish to have no further contact with him as he has continued to approach us with little or no indication that he has changed his view of the discipline. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, when I have a look at the reasons that you give here, I see no mention other than a mention of porneia, I see no mention in your reasoning of the child sexual abuse. Are you able to explain that?
Well, our primary focus at the time was his continuing to make overtures to the person for which he was originally disfellowshipped. We felt it was still going on. Yes. So we focused on that, but at the same time, with regard to the porneia as mentioned, as I said earlier, we did press it with him, and he refused. He always tried to diminish that part of his wrongdoing. But I think we might have dropped the ball there by not actually mentioning it with regard to his our decision.
Could I just draw Councillor Hastings' attention to the second last paragraph where there is some discussion of a denial of any incest? That's if I'm on the right document. Am I on the right document? Yes.
I don't see it, but I've misread documents before.
First page.
He denied incest. That's what's being referred to.
Yes.
Yes. Well, it's being pointed out to me, Mr. Baker, that there is one reference where it says he denied incest. But as you've given evidence, your principal concern was this potential adulterous relationship, wasn't it?
That was our focus at the time. We thought that the whole incest matter had been thoroughly dealt with by the Mariba congregation. I'm not trying to pass responsibility or I'm not trying to diminish our responsibility, but we thought at that time the whole matter regarding the incest had been established. That's why later on we had to get it out of him again, and we were mildly chastised for it.
So, Mr. Baker, when you say it had been established, what you and I are seeking or needing to do is to establish whether he was repentant in relation to it. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. And your focus here, though, seems to be rather in relation to the potential adultery, suggesting that that was seen as more important than the child sexual abuse, or am I misunderstanding it?
No, that's not correct. If you look at the statement I made right at the outset, there was a concern among the body of elders as to the welfare of the abused, because apparently her own mother was not supporting her. Her father was the violator, and we did have real concern. And in fact, I'm quite sure we raised the question as to the welfare of the victim.
All right, Mr. Baker, perhaps we can move on to the next request. If you have a look at tab 10, and that's actually a letter from Beanley East, signed by you as committee chairman. I suppose by then you had taken over the chairmanship of that judicial committee, had you?
Yes, it appears that way.
And attached to it is a letter that you had received some months earlier from BCH, is that right?
Yes.
And if you see the date of BCH's letter is September 1990, you see that the date of your letter, 19 March 1990, must be wrong. It must be 1991. Do you accept that?
Yes, there's been a mistake.
Yes. And
probably 91. Yeah.
Yes, well, we can see that from the reply to that letter, which is at tab 11, which is on 6 April 1991. Now, you record there that you have made further investigations about whether BCH was having any further communications with the other woman. Is that right?
Yes.
And you were concerned about the relatively short period of time since the previous reinstatement request had been declined.
Yes.
And you do not express any concern about the child sexual abuse. Did you consider it at all?
Yes. Once again, I feel I may have dropped the ball there, because we honestly thought it was fully dealt with by the congregation that handled that matter. And that's how it was.
You know, are you saying, Mr. Baker, that it's not the case that this potential consensual extramarital contact between BCH and another woman was taken to be more serious than the child sexual abuse?
At that particular time, that was the focus. Yes, I would say it wasn't more serious, because as I've already stated, we're of the opinion that the matter with regard to his abuse had been settled. The fact that there's no letters from Marita that I can recall stating anything to do with the child abuse. I could be wrong, but I don't think there's any letters that I'm aware of.
Although you did know from what you said to us earlier, as I understood it, that one of the reasons he had been disfellowshipped was under the label porneia for sexual abuse of his daughter. So you were aware of it.
Yes, we were aware of it.
And being aware of it, you would have had to have been satisfied that he had repented in relation to it before you could recommend reinstatement. Would that be right?
Yes.
And it would then have been something that one would have expected that you would investigate in your consideration of the reinstatement request.
Well, I guess we would have got onto that, having felt that the matter was handled. There was much obfuscation on his part in diminishing that aspect of it. So whenever it came up, he tended to gloss over it and move on to the next point. I don't want to assign any motives, but he was very clever at that.
Do you have tab 11 there, Mr. Baker? Do you have tab 11? So the letter dated 6 April 1991 from Mariba to Beenley East. Do you have that?
Yes.
And so you may take some comfort from the fact that in that letter, which is nearly 3 pages, the Mariba congregation does not, in writing to you, raise the child sexual abuse as an issue. Looking back on it now, does that strike you as odd?
Without putting the Mariba brothers in a bad light. And in hindsight, yes, it strikes me as odd.
And then at tab 12, you'll see you received a further letter from BCH seeking to justify reinstatement. You have that?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And at tab 14, you received a letter from the branch, in other words, Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Australia, dated 12 July.
Yes.
You were still dealing with the matter at that stage, I take it. Because you left in 1993, as I recall.
Yes, that's right.
And so you would have been presiding overseer at Beenley East at that time, July 1991.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Essentially, that letter from the branch advised that you should meet with BCH and give them some direction towards possible reinstatement in the future. Do you see that?
Yes.
And did you do that? Did you meet with BCH?
Yes.
And I take it you were not satisfied as to his repentance at that stage?
That's correct.
And you have
in fact, at any point in time,
yes. And at
while I was still there.
And then you, at tab 15, do you have that? You received, did you, a further letter? I beg your pardon, you sent a further letter to the Judicial Committee at Mariba.
Yes.
Dated 14 August 1991.
Yes.
And you will see in the 6th paragraph, the one beginning with subsequently, we had another meeting with BCH
yes.
on the 7th of August. You raised the question of lying. In the next paragraph, you raised the question of the other woman. And in the next paragraph, starting sadly, you raised the question of porneia with his daughter as established by the appeal committee.
Yes.
And the outcome of that was that you were still not satisfied with regard to repentance. Is that right?
Yes. think he felt that the Beenleigh elders were an obstacle for him to being reinstated.
And at 16, do you have tab 16? It's not actually signed by you, it's just apparently from your brother's Beenleigh East congregation, and it's directed to the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society at Ingleburn. Is that a letter that came from you and the fellow members of your committee?
Yes. Paragraph 3, I mentioned he still refuses to acknowledge the porneia he committed with his daughters.
Yes. And then at tab 18, you'll see the branch office replied. And in the third paragraph, they said, regarding the offences with his teenage daughter, we understand you have information from the elders in Mariba on this matter. Mr. BCH says he's willing to go to Mariba to meet with the elders there if need be. This will be a personal decision. I take it you received that letter, did you?
Yes.
You see at the top of the letter it's got a reference SD, which I understand to be service desk, and then after that it says SSA. Do you know what that represents?
Well, SD I understood to be the service desk. The SSA, I don't know, Secret Service Agent?
I take it.
I don't know.
I take it you weren't being serious about that, Mr. Baker.
No, I'm sorry.
That's all right. And then at tab 19, you, as I understand it, reply and set out another decision with regard to not reinstating. Is that right?
Yes. Understating wherever possible the gravity of the wrongs for which he is disfellowshipped.
And we understand that by this time he had moved on to St. George, is that right?
Yes. That's about the time that I exit the scene. But I do recall St. George contacting me. And once again there was what appears to be an untruth made.
Yes, and at tab 20 there seems to be, I think, a reference from that.
In the third paragraph down?
That's a letter that you weren't party to, of course. It was from St. George to Mariba, is that right?
Yes.
But it says that in fourth paragraph, in talking to Brother Monty Baker from Beenleigh, he mentioned that they too felt that his conduct of late met with their approval, and they were contemplating a favourable recommendation too. Now, what is your response to that?
I question who the he is. It says, in talking to Brother Baker from Beenleigh, he mentioned that they too felt that his conduct of late was meeting with his approval. Now, who mentioned that? Me? Or was it BCH's talking to me?
Well, I suggest, Mr. Baker, on the ordinary reading of it, it would be a reference to you. But what are you saying in relation to that you did not mention that position? In other words, you did not say that it met with the approval of Beenleigh.
I seem to recall having a phone call. Oh, it's so far back now. And I might have said something along the lines, he's showing all the outward signs. But I think I do put a caveat on it. In earlier letters, saying, we still have this nagging doubt in our minds. vehemently denied until recently that he interfered with his daughters. Just trying to find.
So are you saying you don't recall ever reaching the position where you were supportive of or accepting of a reinstatement?
Yes, this is in the letter dated 14th of the 3rd, 92. It said, in our last meeting before he left for St. George, we were right to the point of recommending that he is ready due to his showing outwardly all the correct manifestations of repentance, along with a strong desire to be part of the organisation. It says, we did, however, have just one matter that we wanted to follow up before we would make a recommendation to you. In this matter, we wanted to clarify with you. From your reply, it appears that BHA is still untruthful and still withholding information, and appears to be understating wherever possible the gravity of the reasons that he was disfellowshipped. Are you still there?
Yes, we are, Mr. Baker. Do you not see us?
Hello?
Can you hear us?
Can you see and hear us?
Apparently not, Your Honour. Can you see or hear us yet, Mr. Baker?
Have we lost the connection?
We need to adjourn to do it, or can you not just do it? Just read out.
It's got to be gone.
He probably has his phone on.
Hello, Karen? Yeah, okay, how do you think I'm going?
Just cut the sound.
Good. You still can't hear us, is that right?
We might do it on the telephone with Your Honour's leave.
Yeah, we could do that. Is there much more to go?
No, you're right. It's just about done. So we can just wrap it up in a couple of minutes.
Thanks.
Bring him back and do it on the telephone.
There as well, though, isn't
You should be.
he? As well fix it. I think it's just too simple. Yeah, I know. All right.
Sorry, I wouldn't like to be they've been really good.
Have we rung him back?
I did bring him, Your Honour, and just told him to wait.
He's a taking it.
You still may not be able to.
No, Your Honour, apparently the video link will be re-established within 2 minutes, I'm told. My experience is always wishful thinking with technology, but if we do it on the telephone, then it won't be recorded. If Your Honour wishes to adjourn briefly, we're obviously in Your Honour's hands. But
Alan Page. Yes, he's just waiting. It's 40-minute drive away.
If you hold the telephone, why won't it be recorded?
I don't know, Your Honour.
No, we've lost it altogether. Not much point at the moment, we've lost it altogether.
Hello.
I'm looking for Mr. Baker.
Wrong number.
Thank you.
No, there is nada. How did it?
No, here she is.
Sorry.
Okay.
Mr. Baker, it's Mr. Stewart here. Are you now hearing us? Are you hearing us on the video yet?
No,
All right, we'll put.
I was about to back up.
All right.
Oh, here it's appeared now. Yes. Yes.
Right, it's going to be C. It just won't be in the video. I think there's an issue on there. But at least you can hear it. I can plot. Whatever.
Can you hear me, Mr. Baker?
Can't hear anything though.
Mr. Baker, can you hear us?
Yes.
Thank you. Right, you in the hearing again, Mr. Baker. We've lost video, I'm told, but we do have audio. We can hear you.
We have a small video.
We do have a small video of you, so we can see you. Do you not see us?
Yes, clearly.
Oh, well, there you go. Good. We'll take up where we were, Mr. Baker. Now, in your paragraph 5C of your statement, you say that at the above mentioned elders meeting, so I understand that was the meeting that you remembered at that time to discuss reinstatement.
Yes.
It was revealed by the protagonists that he was expelled from the Mariba congregation for his abusing his two daughters. At the meeting, my only input was to ask about the welfare of his two daughters. In view of the statement that the mother of his daughters was aware of the wrongdoing at the time of the abuse, this would unlikely make her a fit person to care for them. And you go on a little bit about that. Do you see that?
Yes.
Are you suggesting that the welfare of the two daughters was your principal concern throughout the reinstatement issues that you dealt with over a period of time.
Well, being truthful at the time, I don't know if you've ever felt personally that you regret not having followed through on a matter. I'm sure we've all done that. And on this occasion, I regret not having followed through. The answer to my question at that time was, what about the daughters?
Looking back now, is there anything else you might have done differently in your involvement in the matter, Mr. Baker?
Well, in the light of what I know now, of course, in hindsight, I would have followed through to inquire about the welfare of the daughters. In fact, I'm sure any elder would do so.
Is there any way in which you think that the Jehovah's Witnesses' response to child sexual abuse can or should be improved?
Well, at that time, yes, but I understand there have been a number of improvements since. I've not seen them. As I said, I've taken great efforts to try and erase my memory from anything associated with the witnesses.
From what you knew of the process at that time, is there any particular criticism or weakness that you would identify for improvement?
Well, I'm sure there'd be a number of things, not necessarily with this case, but a number of things where questions come to your mind, and there are occasions to express your opinions to travelling overseas and so forth. But that's way above my pay scale.
Right, thank you, Mr. Baker. Those are my questions, although it may be that there are others who wish to ask you questions. Thank you, Ron.
Does anyone have any questions?
Just one brief question. Mr. Baker, it's Ms. David here. I represent BCG.
Yes.
Not sure which way I'm looking, but anyway. Just very briefly, you were asked about the things that you might do to change the Jehovah's Witness system.
I think just keep looking at your screen.
Right, thank you. Would you agree that one important thing to do, that in the reinstatement process, that the victim must have a voice in that reinstatement process?
Without a doubt.
Thank you.
Without a doubt.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Baker, as you know, my name is Ms. McGlinchey and I represent you in these proceedings.
Yes.
All right. Mr. Baker, you've given some evidence about your recollection of the two attempts or the two approaches that BCH made to your committee making a plea for reinstatement, and as you recall it, he was rejected on both of those occasions. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you know that after at a time later than that, he was actually reinstated to the church?
No. I think I'd made my exit before then. When you mentioned it to me at this hearing, at this commission, I was flabbergasted.
Are you saying that you not only didn't hear about it while you're at the church, but that surprises you now to hear that?
Even today.
Are you able to say why?
Well, it's the obvious, as I've mentioned, the obfuscation, the diminishing of the wrongdoing, and it just seems, I just find it unfathomable that he would be allowed back in.
All right.
And I believe it's so soon, 2 years.
Do you recall ever telling BCH that his chances of getting reinstated would be better or improved if he moved to a different location?
Yes.
You recall saying that to him?
Yes, well, at the time he was seen by witnesses to be making overtures to a woman in the congregation who was a reproved witness, and he would have made it hard for her, and I believe he did make contact with her and her children. So I recommended to him that he should really get out of the country if he really wanted to be reinstated, because that was probably an exaggeration, that he shouldn't have been anywhere near her.
So when you told BCH that, just to be clear, it wasn't an effort to perhaps suggest to go somewhere where people didn't know about his history of sexually abusing his children?
Oh no, that wasn't the reason. Right. He was so persistent for reinstatement, and I just told him the chances where he was were not good.
Right. I just want to ask you some questions about your knowledge of allegations of sexual abuse in the Jehovah's Witness Church. You said in your statement at paragraph 3, and you don't need to go to it, I'll read it to you, this was not endemic within the Jehovah's Witnesses Church as it is in some institutions. Now, you were referring to allegations of sexual abuse when you put that in your statement. Was that correct?
Yes.
All right. Since making your statement, you have heard the opening to this hearing from counsel assisting, is that correct?
Yes.
And do you recall that he said words to the effect that documents handed to the Commission from the Jehovah's Witness Church included 1,006 files relating to allegations of child sexual abuse? Do you recall that?
Yes.
What was your reaction to that?
That statement was made over a period from 1950 until today.
Yes, correct.
1,065. So that works out at about 15 a year, my calculations.
All right.
But I was still flabbergasted, and I still question the data gathering for that information. Right. Were they cases that were actually proven, or were they just reported cases? I just find it so hard to believe.
All right. When you were still in the church, was it a matter that you heard discussed as you moved around the congregations about the child sexual abuse was an issue or a problem? Did you ever hear that discussed?
No. Now, this is the first occasion that I've come across in all the years that I was serving in the congregation.
So the first case you came across was the matter of BCB?
I think I remotely knew of one in New Zealand, but I had nothing to do with it then.
All right.
I happened to be working in the Bethel at the time in New Zealand.
And you didn't have any knowledge that perhaps the church hierarchy or anybody in the hierarchy may have been handling allegations of child sexual abuse?
I seem to recall it was reported in a newspaper in New Zealand. I'm afraid I cannot recall, but that was such a remote case in some village somewhere, from what I remember. Right. I'm quite sure that this is the first I've ever come across it personally.
Mr. Baker, you expressed surprise that the Jehovah's Witnesses had this number of files because you say you hadn't personally come across the problem. The conclusion, which appears to be available, is that the people who did know didn't talk, and certainly didn't talk to you about what the church's history might be.
Obviously.
And I would assume, but you might be able to confirm for me, that the church would have been embarrassed if knowledge had got out about allegations of this type in any number being made against members of the church.
Well, yes, their reputation for cleanness in the congregation is one of the assets of the church. In fact, that's what attracts a lot of people to the organisation, is their reputation for their cleanness and their upholding of righteous principles. Now, for that information to come out, that would have damaged the asset, as it were. So I would imagine it would have been embarrassing for them to bring it out. And I still question the credibility of the data.
Well, it's just the files. It's the church's files. That's what it is.
I understand, Your Honour.
Just one other matter. Mr. Baker, in hearing the evidence of BCB and also in your discussion with her, you heard about her experience and the trauma she experienced, BCG, right? The trauma she experienced by going through the process of having to make her allegations and be judged by 3 men. You're aware that that's her evidence, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
All right. As I understand it, elders are always men. Is that the case?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. In your understanding of the church and the scriptures that underpin the workings of the church, do you see any possibility of women becoming elders in the church?
No, it's a scriptural principle. This in no way diminishes the role of women in the organisation, but a scriptural principle is held to. The mores of society change over a period of time, and I feel it was only in the last 10 years that we had a woman premier in Queensland. The society is changing all the time, but I don't think the truth of the Bible will ever change. And as a result, I know that Jehovah's Witnesses are not the only ones that hold to this, women who are not to be elders. There are very capable women who assist other women in the congregations. But
not as elders, is that correct?
No.
And not as teachers?
They can be teachers in the sense that the Bible refers to them as a great army of preachers who are working for God. And they're teaching people Bible studies. In fact, they carry the bulk of the work.
But they can't actually teach in Kingdom Hall? Is that correct?
They do have discussions with each other, but they don't teach from the podium.
All right. And when they have discussions with each other, that is other women, they're required to wear a headscarf, is that correct?
No.
Head covering?
No.
I see.
No, they're only required to wear a head covering if they happen to be a small group and there was another unbaptised male there, and obviously the only one who could conduct the meeting would be a mature sister, and on that occasion she would acknowledge her subjection by wearing a head covering.
Right. Thank you, Mr.
I say subjection, not subjugation.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Baker. I don't have anything further. Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Baker, you appear to still have significant knowledge of the scriptures and the teachings of the Bible. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. I wouldn't say that. I just listened to some of those brothers and they're making their statements, and they were way ahead of me. But on that aspect, I still actually read the Bible often. But when I said I was trying to erase any memories, it was to do with the church.
Can you just help me with this then? And I appreciate that for the church and maybe for you too, that the Bible is the divine word of God.
Yes, it exerts power, yes.
But is there ever a discussion about that word having been expressed in the social context and mores of its time?
Yes, of course. At the time it was written.
That's right, and expresses the society as it was then. Is that ever talked about?
Of course. Just in earlier conversations you felt that when the brothers brought up the matter of 2 witnesses from Deuteronomy 19:15, you put it in context and say, yes, the result was a death penalty. But in actual fact, in Matthew 18 and verse 6, Jesus also made the comment about if a matter is not resolved with 2 witnesses, then the wrongdoer is considered as a man of the nations, which is the same as disfellowship.
But what I'm seeking to understand is whether well, let me go back a step. You appreciate that one of the very significant issues for the Royal Commission in this case study is the way the Church responds to allegations of sexual abuse. And we will have to make findings and recommendations in relation to the way the Church does respond to those allegations. Do you understand?
Yes.
And do you understand that for many people, the fact that women are excluded from a process of adjudication in relation to the allegation of sexual abuse is a significant issue and a problem?
Well, I know, while I've never been in this case before, I know in other cases where the parents have been present at the time of questioning.
That's a different issue. At the moment, I'm just looking at the question of the people who determine the truth of the allegation, which is the elders. Do you understand?
Yes. Yes.
Now, and as you know and rightly point out, in our society, although by no means perfected, but nevertheless the role of women has changed and changed significantly since probably World War II, but maybe back to World War I. Do you understand?
Yes, I fully understand.
Yeah.
And in fact, a lot of the mores of society have changed in other areas too.
Well, that may be so, but when we look at the role of women in our community, it has changed and is in the process of continuing change. Do you understand?
Oh, I fully understand, and I can see problems coming up in the future in certain areas because...
Well, just stay with me for a second. If it's the case that one may look at the Bible as reflecting the mores in the context, social context of its time, is there room for a discussion now about whether or not the insistence upon elders being confined to men should change?
I can't see that. The primary reason is because there was a direct edict from Paul to the Ephesians, I think it was, where each one has a role in the congregation, and the responsibility comes upon the males. And in society in that day, it would not have even been thought unusual. In fact, they would have thought of it unusual when those with the gifts of the Spirit, gifts of prophecy, stood up and they were women in the congregation. Now, that would have seemed so much out of place to them. But today, it's the other way around.
Well, maybe it's not an opportunity for us to take the discussion too much further, but there are a number of churches, of course, which have come to understand the biblical injunctions in the context of the 20th and 21st century, haven't they?
Yes.
And those churches have, in fact, in some cases, made bishops of women.
Oh, of course, I see that. Catholic Church seems to be holding up at this stage, but for how much longer we don't know. But on the other side of the coin, you have to remember that while Jehovah's Witnesses may seem out of step with society's thinking, there have been other occasions. For example, in 1974, if you were caught evidence of using tobacco, you were disfellowshipped by the congregation. Now, in those days, people thought, wow, Jehovah's Witnesses are really harsh, cruel people, disfellowshipping for someone for using tobacco. And yet by today's standards, they would be applauded for having such standards.
Well, finally, on this topic, do you think that the process that you engaged in seeking to identify the truth of the allegation of a young lady in relation to her allegation of sexual assault, do you think that process would have benefited if one of you in the adjudicating panel had been a woman?
I think it would have taken the heat off the situation. I can imagine how intimidating it would be for a young girl. In fact, I've seen it, where a young girl has to come before 3 elders, and I'm sure they would have done everything they could to put her at ease, and they would have, I know on my own occasion I used to say a little joke just to try and put everything at ease. But I do believe and I've seen situations where sisters have been present as well to supply the moral support, and it has worked out for the better.
But would it be a better process if a woman was engaged in actually making the decision, was one of the adjudicators? At least one of the adjudicators.
I don't want to get involved in the gender battle, but I would assume that if that was the case, the women would still use the same scriptures as what the men would use.
It's not a question of using the scriptures, it's a question of the tribunal, the constitution of the tribunal that has to be confronted by a young woman to tell her story of intimate sexual assault.
Mm.
Do you think it's appropriate that that tribunal just only ever be comprised of 3 men?
My way of thinking, and my wife is not a witness of 20 years, she would agree with what you say. And of course, you know I've been indoctrinated to my beliefs, but I would say what you say is a fairly fair decision, a recommendation.
Yes. Does anyone have any questions on those matters?
No,
Mr. Stewart?
Your Honour, that's all for Mr. Baker. And
Mr. Baker, thank you for your evidence. You are now formally excused.
tomorrow morning, Your
Thank
Honour,
you.
I would plan to start with Mr. Penchef, also via video to Brisbane.
Very well, 10 o'clock in the morning.